Today we are going to talk about PolicySpace2 model, an agent-based model focusing on housing policies and their impact on inequality and poverty alleviation. To start, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bernardo Alves Furtado. I'm a tenured researcher at IPEA, which is a research institute attached to the government here in Brazil. I live in Brasilia. I made my PhD in Utrecht University, along with co-tutorship with a PhD in economics in Belo Horizonte. And I've been studying urban analytics and urban cities for quite some time.
To begin, let's discuss the purpose of Policy Space 2 model. Could you explain the primary objectives of your model in relation to housing policies and economic inequalities?
Okay, so the idea of policy space is try to mimic a little bit the economic consequences of testing alternative policies. My job is to help the government assess the best options available. And then we have some public policies such as housing or what we call Bolsa Familia, which is to provide in-kind money, cash to the families. And it's very difficult to compare how the results will unfold along the economy. So we built PolicySpace as an idea of mimicking some relevant markets with a lot of spatial and official empirical data so that we could test if the government had a specific amount of money, how the application of the money into these different policies, which one would provide general better indicators for the society.
Moving onto the development phase of this model, what were the main challenges you faced in developing policy space model, and specifically, uh, how did you address the complexities of integrating spatial data and economic interactions within this model?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the policy space explains very well the idea that agent-based modeling can be built across modules. So we start with policy space 1, which tested a different policy question. And we had all this platform of economic markets in place. And then it was kind of easy the next step just to add more details, more relevant empirical data, and move forward to test other policies. Actually, at the moment, we have just published yesterday, there is no text yet, but the model is already on GitHub, PolicySpace3, which intends to test some environmental policies. But I think the most relevant challenges is to convince policymakers, and especially to convince economics, that other methodologies could help understand a problem. The problem is very complex. The phenomenon of housing and boundaries, administrative boundaries, and spatial interactions of markets is really hard to predict and to understand the effects. And then I believe modeling, agent-based modeling would be one more tool so that policymakers could have a larger idea of how policies influence citizens' lives.
Let's talk about the outcomes. What were the main insights coming out of the analysis conducted with this model? And could you elaborate on how different public policies like monetary aid and rental vouchers performed in your simulation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. The basic idea is that providing a smaller amount of help for a larger number of families seems to be much better for the economy than providing, for example, the houses themselves. And this, Mohsen, is a little bit difficult because we understand that we lack a lot of housing, and we do need to provide houses at a relatively cheap cost for low-income families. However, the rental voucher, which addresses the problem of housing as well, comes out as a result that is much better than providing the house itself. So if I were stuck only with the decision of the housing policy, I would definitely go for the rental voucher instead of building, constructing, and giving the houses to the low-income families. However, when we compare these three policies, and you notice that one is completely different, right? To providing cash to the families, and the families make the decision. So it's a less amount of help, but a lot of more families are helped. And then overall, the comparison suggests that providing the cash is by far the best policy. But okay, we need a housing policy as well, then I would go for the rental voucher. However, some things are not included in the model, such as, for example, the sentiment, the feeling that people want to own their house. So again, it's a complex phenomena. We have a lot of politics, we have a lot of values, and I think PolicySpace just helps provide some quantitative evidence that which policy would probably be better for society as a whole, not considering who, of course, if you're one of the families who received the house, you would be very glad with that policy. But considering the full set of society, comparing, for example, indicators such as unemployment, GDP, and inequality, then I would say that focusing on cash transfers would be the best option.
Since you have made this model available via comsys.net, I mean, uh, what do you think about making models available and accessible to other people and other researchers? And the second question, what were the main challenges in making your model accessible to others using this platform? I mean, the comsys.net.
Yes. So to the first question, Mohsen, I have no doubt in my mind that any paper or model that you publish, you should make the code available, right? I am definitely one to argue, for example, at JAS or any other periodical journals that we publish, you should provide the code. And this is one thing. Another thing is I'm a civil servant, right? I'm a public worker, and my salary is provided by the government. So definitely everything that I produce, not only the code, but also there is a book associated with that, and the paper, they must be public. But in practice, what happens is it's a quite complex model, and it will take a person to read and understand all the coding and replicate. Only people who would be really interested. So we should make it available for the reviewers and for the public in general. But for a person to actually download and test and advance the model, it would take or a lot of publicity, which PolicySpace doesn't have yet, or an interest, such as a PhD student who really needs to learn the model, because it does take time, right, to understand all the code and all the implications of all the choices that were made.
Looking ahead, what's next for this topic? Are there follow-up studies available or planned that build on the findings from this model? I mean, do you see any potential for further adapting this model to address other related research questions or policy issues?
Yes, definitely. Like I said, we just made available in my GitHub at BA Furtado the PolicySpace2, which are the main changes, right? We introduced an intermediate market. So there are 12 sectors, which are the standard 12 ISAIC NACE sectors. And we also have the composition of an input-output matrices. So in PolicySpace2, our metropolitan regions were modeled alone, independently. Now the metropolitan areas, they buy and sell to the rest of Brazil. So you can choose any list of a number of municipalities. Of course, we provide the urban concentration areas that are typical in Brazil from the official Census Bureau. And then you can use this agglomeration of urban municipalities to run an input-output matrix, which is specific for that group of municipalities and the rest. And then you can run the simulation. And of course, we now have the introduction of this environmental element. And then we have also official statistic data on emissions by sectors, by municipalities, which gives a good estimate of emissions when you run the model. So if you are watching this video, what you think consider is that we have the main markets. We have a labor market, we have a real estate market, and we have a goods and service market with intermediate market and 12 sectors. And then you can use all these markets. We have 5 tax general groups of taxes imposed on the market: land market, transmission, housing transmission taxes, and also consumption taxes and taxes on wages and taxes on profits. And then you can use all this platform to address, for example, your own questions. So the next policy question we're going to focus on is how we can tweak and change the policy to the environmental polluters, right? The firms that pollute more, and see how they respond to a policy, and to see if we can find out what is the best policy for each sector, and it brings the most reduction of emissions with the lowest impact on GDP and income and wages and everything. So output of the model is by like 100 different indicators. And this is another challenge, because if you're a policymaker, you don't want the 100 information, right?
Yeah.
You want one. You want to know what is the best, but the best depends on what you're considering, right?
Exactly.
But you can choose an indicator, and okay, I want to go for inequality, which I would go myself, and I want to increase welfare in the society, but at the same time with the lowest possible emissions and inequality. So that's what we aim to provide with PolicySpace 3.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your valuable insights about this model.
Okay, no problem. We're here.